provider, you get a better deal typically if you go to the network. But in this particular case, if you would happen to go to a doctor that's not in the network, actually the co-insurance, instead of 20% that you pay, is you would pay 40%. So you really want to be careful on that as you go out on your own and as you're looking for insurance. A lot of times the network's really important. If you had a plan that had really good rates but had very few doctors on it, you would want to look at that, because if your doctor's not on the plan, it could create extra out of pocket for you in the future. But like Blue Cross, Blue Shield, and even Dakota Care, most of the providers are on, so it's hard to find someone that's not on. But do note that the co-insurance does go up if you go to a non-provider on this particular example. Now the out-of-pocket maximum, once again, the out-of-pocket is both your deductible and co-insurance. So in this particular case, if I'm a single, my deductible is $1,500 and my out-of-pocket maximum is $3,500. So what that really means is my co-insurance is I pay 20% until I paid up to an additional $2,000. Once I've paid my deductible of $1,500, then I pay my co-insurance of another $2,000. My out-of-pocket of $3,500 has been reached, and I don't have any more doctor or, so to speak, hospital deductibles or expenses at the facility from that standpoint. So my out-of-pocket is $3,500. As you work your way down, your copay in this plan is $25. As we work our way over to the higher deductibles, we'll notice that the deductible will actually went up a little bit more, or the copay, I should say. Preventative care, most of them now are covered. A lot of them now are going to be subject to the new government's regulations on preventative care, where there's no cost to you if you go in for preventative. Of course, there's a list of things you got to follow. If you go beyond the list, then it's going to be subject to deductible and co-insurance. And then the other area that we have down here is prescription drug. And note how this works is $100 single deductible and $200 if you're a two-party or a family. And what they do is, with prescription drugs, this is one of the hardest areas for most insurance companies to control costs, in my opinion. And what they try to do is give you a financial incentive to take the generics. Generic drugs are not the ones we see on TV when we're watching the Super Bowl or 60 Minutes or some of those. Those are brand name drugs. Now really what a generic is after, typically is after 7 years, a brand name runs its course, the patent falls off, and then you have multiple manufacturers of that drug, and it drives the cost down. If only one person's manufacturing it, they can kind of set the price where they want, but if you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people manufacturing it, the competition drives the cost down, and that's what creates generics. Now in this case, I have a $100 deductible, and if I can take a tier 1, which is a generic, they'll waive that deductible and I pay $10. So they're giving me a financial incentive to take a generic drug when it applies. Now, if I happen to be on a brand name drug, and they call it a preferred list, a formulary is another terminology here for prescription drugs. What it is my copay now, instead of $10, is now $35, so it's went up some, but I also am responsible for that $100 deductible during the year. So if it's January 5th and I go in and it's a brand name drug, I'm going to pay the first $100, then my copay kicks in, so I'm going to pay a pretty good chunk of it depending on the cost. Now, if after January 5th, the next time I go in, if I take another brand name, I won't have another deductible to hit, but I will pay the higher copay. If you would take a tier 3 drug, they call it non-preferred list or non-formulary list, you can see your cost on that one would be $50 or 50%, whichever's greater. And most of the time, what the insurance companies say is that if it's a tier 3 drug, there should be a drug that's either tier 2 and sometimes even a generic that's available. That's why you always want to ask for generics if you're comfortable taking them, because you can save the most money, but if it's a tier 3 drug, you can see $50 or 50%, whichever's greater. That certainly is going to be more money than paying $10 or a flat $35. And it's really important to ask pharmacists, ask your doctor if there's a generic available. The good news is about 3/4 of all drugs are generic now, so there's a lot of them are generic. That still means there's still a lot of them, there's 25% or more that are still brand name, and you ideally want to take a formulary drug. None of us in the room, it's hard for us to know where things are. Nowadays with computers you can look drugs up. Most insurance companies will have a formulary where you can go online and look at it, or you can ask your pharmacist or your doctor. Particular pharmacists, they study that stuff so closely, they should be able to tell you if there's a generic available. But prescription drugs is certainly a hard area, and you definitely want to be aware of it. And you can kind of work your way down. On here too, the one thing I do want to mention too is maternity. Note maternity is covered until you get to a $5,000 deductible. Note there's a little line. It's not covered. So you always want to ask about those kind of things and make sure you understand the policy you're looking at. If it's important to you, if it's something you need, even if it's something you don't need now but you want to have in the future, you a lot of times want to have that on your policy so that, you know, down the road you do need to have maternity coverage. You're not like, oh, now I can't get it. It's too late. And the way individual insurance works, and we'll talk a little bit about individual and group, I'm kind of bouncing around, but I'm trying to keep us up to speed, is with individual, if you said, all right, I want to take this $1,500 deductible, typically the first step is you fill out an application. And you have to, that application will ask you question, name, date of birth, social security number, height and weight, just basic information. Then typically on the pages to follow, they're going to ask you some health questions. You know, an example might be, have you had claims in excess of $5,000 in the last 5 years? If I had my burst appendix, I'd have to mark yes. And then I got to go below and give some details on it. Now if I have a pending heart transplant coming up, in all likelihood what they would say is that's a really big expense that's coming up and it's predictable. What we're going to do is we're going to either decline Mike and not even offer him insurance, or we're going to put a rider on them where they'll say I'll cover everything but this particular procedure, or they may say instead of this rate we're going to rate you higher. Your rate's going to be this rate, it's going to be a little bit higher rate. Now those are some of the new rules and regulations that could be changed depending on where the laws go in the future. And right now, if everything stays as is with no changes, in 2014 they're scheduled to not be, you know, where people can be declined, you know, for individual insurance. But as of now, we want to just play with the game we have, you know, with the rules we have. A person can be declined, and that's where, you know, if I use maternity, I can't wait till I'm 2 months pregnant to buy maternity coverage, because that's a known expense. Most companies say that you got to be 9 to 10 months, you know, so it's an example, as long as my wife's not pregnant, we can get on it, but if she was, even if she said, well, we haven't told anybody yet, you still have to disclose that, and it typically is not going to be covered during that time for most companies. Now, in group insurance, that's different because that's through an employer. They don't have the periods where you have to apply. I mean, you still fill out an application out in most cases, but they don't reject you as long as you've had continuous coverage for the last 12 months without a gap of more than 63 days. They have to bring you on, and they would have to cover that procedure. Maternity, you know, pregnancy, or my heart surgery, or, you know, cancer, or whatever it might be. So there's some advantages to having group coverage over individual. But you know what, the way it is nowadays, if you're self-employed or, you know, you're between jobs, sometimes you have to get individual coverage. Or you retire before 65 and you're not on Medicare, you need to have something else. So that's why it's good to kind of know how both work. And like I said, we may have some questions as we go through here. Now, as we work our way over, you know, and maybe I'll just go back to this. Note here, let's say it's my family, it's my wife, and I have 2 boys. There's 4 of us. So the way this would work, if I took that $1,500, we could potentially have up to 3 of us hit in our deductible. So notice the family deductible says $4,500. So if we had 3 of the 4 of us that got sick, we each could have a $1,500 deductible. Then we get into the 80-20 co-insurance where we would pay 20%, the insurance company would pay 80%, up to an additional $2,000, and we could have 3 of us hit our co-insurance. So our out-of-pocket could be, if we have something, you know, everything went wrong, kind of that rainy day, everything went wrong one year, could be up to $10,500. So you can see you got to be prepared if you have that. Now the likelihood of that happening is very low. We don't see it very often, but you'll want to be aware of it, which you're a family out of pocket. Now let's bump our way over. Let's pretend like we went over here to a $5,000 deductible. And we're going to look at the rates in a little bit here, but a $5,000 deductible, instead of $1,500, I'd pay the first $5,000. Now if I'm a family, that means I could have up to 3 of us hit our deductible. That could be $15,000. So it's a lot of money you potentially could have to come up with. Most providers are, you know, comfortable on setting up some payment plan, but still that's a lot of money. Secondly, notice the co-insurance. Instead of an 80-20, everyone see it on there? What's it say? 30%? So it's a 70-30. You would pay 30% of the cost versus